My parents called our new home a pigsty before they ever stepped inside. Then my father looked at my wife and me like all our work, our marriage, and everything we had built was something to be ashamed of. So I stayed quiet. I let them laugh. I let my brother post the picture. I let my mother tell the family I was still figuring things out. But Hollow Creek was never just one ugly farmhouse. And when they came back weeks later with a U-Haul, boxes already labeled for our back bedroom, asking where their key was, I finally said the one sentence that made them freeze at the gate. I used to think silence kept a family together. But silence also lets people rename your work, insult your marriage, and still expect a key when life turns against them. That night at the gate, I finally understood something. A home is not truly yours until your peace is protected inside it. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from. And if you've ever had family insult what you built, then come back expecting to use it. Write it in the comments. I read every one. My parents called our new place a pigsty before they ever stepped inside it. 6 weeks later, they would be standing outside my locked gate with a moving truck, asking where they were supposed to sleep. They did not know then that the gate, the gravel road under their tires, the barn behind me, and every acre down to the creek already belonged to me. But that came later. That Saturday evening, all I wanted was for my mother and father to come to dinner. Hollow Creek still smelled like fresh paint and cut cedar. The pine floors had been sanded twice because I could not stop seeing the old scratches, even after Marin told me nobody decent would come into a house and inspect the floorboards. Outside the kitchen window, the porch light I had rewired that morning glowed warm against the early fall dark. Marin stood at the stove, lifting the lid off the pot roast. Steam rolled up around her face. She had made it the way my mother used to make it on Sundays, with carrots, onions, and too much black pepper, because my father always said food without pepper tasted like hospital cafeteria food. "You want to change your shirt one more time?" Marin asked. I looked down. Clean flannel. No sawdust, no paint on the sleeve. I already changed once. "I know," she said, and smiled without teasing me. That was Marin. She noticed everything, but she did not use what she noticed to make a person feel small. The table was set for 4. Not a crowd. Not Callow and Saren and their kids. Not cousins. Not neighbors. Just my parents, my wife, and me. I wanted it quiet. I wanted them to see the house before everybody else turned it into a family joke. From the cabinet, I took out my mother's blue china plate. There was a tiny chip on the rim, the kind you only saw if you were washing it by hand. Years earlier, when I moved out, she had handed it to me and said, "Take this. You always did like the chip things." I had laughed back then, because that was what I was trained to do. Now, I set it by the window. Marin glanced over. "That one for your mother? She likes sitting where there's light." Marin nodded. She did not say what we both knew. My mother might not notice, or worse, she might notice and say nothing. At 6:14, my phone rang. My hands were wet from rinsing rosemary, so I tapped speaker and set the phone near the sink. My father's name filled the screen. "Hey, Dad, you close?" There was a pause, but not the kind that means bad signal. The kind that means somebody already decided the conversation before calling. "We're not coming," Orson said. Marin stopped moving at the stove. I looked at the pot roast before I looked at the phone. "Everything okay? We're not driving an hour to see your pigsty, Dylan." The kitchen went quiet except for the low simmer in the pot. Then my mother's voice came in, softer, which somehow made it worse. "Stop pretending this is some big success. It's embarrassing." My fingers curled around the edge of the counter. I could feel the wood under my palm, smooth where I had sanded it myself. I did not look at Marin. Not yet. I was afraid I would see the hurt on her face and lose the little control I had. Dad cleared his throat. "Callow and Saren invited us over. The grandkids were expecting us. We'll come see your place once it's a little more settled." A little more settled. That was my mother's language for presentable enough not to shame her. I could have argued. I could have told them about the beams I replaced, the roof patch I finished, the long nights Marin and I spent making that kitchen safe and warm. I could have sent pictures. I could have begged them to give me 1 hour. Instead, I heard myself say, "I understand." I did not mean I agreed. I meant I had survived the sentence. The call ended. Marin reached over and turned off the burner. She pulled a sheet of foil across the pot roast, slow and careful. The sound of it tearing from the roll seemed too sharp for such a quiet room. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then she asked, "Do you want to eat?" I looked at the table. 4 places. 4 napkins. 4 glasses. My mother's blue plate by the window. Empty and waiting like a fool. "Not yet," I said. I picked up the blue plate, but I did not put it back in the cabinet. I set it on the counter beside the covered roast. Shame came first, not anger. Shame. I wondered if I had invited them too soon. If I should have waited until the siding was done, until the barn was painted, until Hollow Creek looked less like work and more like money. Then I caught myself. The house was not the problem. Their eyes were. So I did not call back. I did not send photos. I did not explain the worth of a home to people who had already decided it was beneath them. The blue plate stayed empty until the pot roast stopped steaming. By the time I finally picked up my phone again, my mother had already told the whole family what kind of home she thought I had built. I left the phone on the counter for as long as I could. Marin rinsed the 2 wine glasses we never used, even though neither of us had taken more than a sip. The pot roast sat under foil. The kitchen had that strange after-dinner smell without the dinner part, warm food, clean dishes, and disappointment hanging in the corners. Outside, the porch light kept burning like it had not gotten the message. I told myself I was not going to look. Nothing good ever came from checking social media after family had hurt you, but silence has weight, and after a while, it pressed hard enough that I picked up the phone. My mother's Facebook post was already there, bright, polished. Cruel in the way only a family photo can be. It showed my parents at Callow's house, standing around his kitchen island with Seren and the kids, white countertops, matching bar stools, a bowl of lemons in the middle like a magazine had placed it there. My father had his hand on Callow's shoulder. I stared at that hand longer than I should have. The caption said, "So proud of the children who build real homes and real lives. Nothing better than dinner with the ones who make us proud." Real homes. That part landed harder than pigsty, because this time she said it where everybody could see. Aunt Iva had commented, "Where's Dylan tonight?" My mother replied, "He's still figuring things out." Bless his heart. Bless his heart. In Western North Carolina, that phrase can mean sympathy, kindness, or a casserole left on someone's porch. But from my mother, it was a lace doily laid over a slap. Marin came up behind me, but she did not lean over my shoulder. She waited until I turned the screen toward her. Her face changed just a little. Not shock, not even anger yet. More like she had just seen a door close and heard the lock slide into place. "You invited them here," she said quietly. "I know. They went there instead. I know." I almost typed something. Just one sentence. "You were supposed to be at my house tonight." That would have been true. It also would have given my mother exactly what she wanted. A chance to say I was being sensitive in front of the whole family. So, I did nothing. Then Marin's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and I saw her hesitate. That half second told me enough. "What is it?" She turned the screen toward me. Dylan. It was Callow's story. He had posted an old picture of the farmhouse, one I had sent months earlier when the porch was still braced and the siding on the north wall had been stripped down to weathered boards. I remembered taking that picture because I was proud. I had seen potential in it. I had thought, someday, this will make a good before photo. Callow had saved it for a different reason. He had put a pink pig sticker over the front steps and written, "Little Bro's Dream Estate, HGTV, Disaster Edition." A cousin had replied with laughing faces. Aunt Iva had written, "Oh, Callow, behave yourself," with another little laugh. Somebody else said, "That place needs more than a contractor. It needs a prayer." And under the story, my mother had liked it. That was the part I kept coming back to. Not Callow. Callow had always known how to dress cruelty up as humor, but my mother saw it, understood what it meant, and tapped approval with her thumb. Marin said, "Do you want me to say something?" Her voice was steady, but her hand was tight around the phone. I knew she would defend me. She would do it cleanly, too. No shouting, no embarrassing herself. Just one sharp sentence that would make everyone uncomfortable because it would be true. That warmed me. It also made me ashamed that she even had to offer. "No," I said. "Let them keep talking." She looked at me for a moment, making sure I meant it. I did. This was not me keeping peace. Peace had not been offered. This was me refusing to interrupt people while they showed their whole hand. I took screenshots. My mother's post. Her caption. The bless his heart comment. Callow's pig sticker story. The replies. The little heart from Verna Voss under a joke made at my expense. Then I made a folder on my phone and named it Family Comments. I did not know yet what I would need it for. I only knew my memory had been called dramatic too many times. Marin set her phone down and picked up the blue plate from the counter. For a second, I wanted to tell her not to bother washing it. Nobody had used it. Nobody had earned it. But she washed it anyway. Warm water ran over the chipped rim. She dried it with the good towel, the one she had folded before my parents were supposed to arrive, and placed it in the rack beside the clean glasses. She was not letting their insult own anything in our kitchen. Some families call it a joke when they are the ones laughing. But when you are the one being laughed at, it does not feel like a joke. It feels like a warning. I stepped out onto the porch after that. The air smelled like wet leaves, sawdust, and the creek beyond the trees. The barn sat in the dark, like a shape nobody else knew how to read. The gravel road disappeared into the black, quiet and private. I thought about replying. I thought about posting a picture of the kitchen, the roast, the table set for 4. But if I argued that night, I would have been arguing from pain. So I put the phone in my pocket and let the night settle. Inside, Marin had turned off most of the lights. The drying rack caught the last glow over the sink, and the blue plate gave back a thin line of shine. I still wanted my parents to see me. I just stopped wanting to perform for people who enjoyed pretending they could not. I saved Callow's pig sticker story without answering it, because I wanted my family to finish showing me who they were. What they did not know was that Hollow Creek was never just one ugly farmhouse, and I had learned the hard way why some dreams have to stay quiet until the papers are recorded. The first time Callow cost me a piece of land, I still believed family mistakes were accidents. I was standing in the barn the morning after his pig sticker story, staring at my phone face down on the workbench like it might start speaking if I looked at it too long. The place smelled of damp hay, motor oil, and fresh sawdust from the boards I had cut the week before. Rain had tapped the roof most of the night, and the old rafters still gave off that wet wood scent that made Hollow Creek feel older than any insult thrown at it. Beside my tape measure sat a green folder, Hollow Creek All Parcels. I rested my hand on it, but I did not open it right away. Being the youngest son in the Voss family had always meant being available. If my father's garage shelves sagged, I fixed them. If my mother needed folding tables hauled to the church fellowship hall, I showed up with my truck. If Callow was covered up with clients, I cleaned gutters, moved furniture, patched leaks, and carried boxes until my shoulders ached. They called Callow responsible because he wore pressed shirts and used words like portfolio and market timing. They called me handy. That sounded kind until I understood what it really meant. Useful, convenient, easy to call, easy to forget. One Thanksgiving, I spent nearly an hour under my mother's sink fixing a garbage disposal that had jammed right before dinner. Everybody else took pictures in the living room while I was flat on my back with dirty water running down my sleeve. When I came out, my shirt was wet and my hair was full of cabinet dust. My father waved me over and said, "Stand on the end, Dylan. Don't block Callow." In that picture, I am half cropped out. For years, I mistook being needed for being valued. The lesson with Mercer Bell finally cured me of that. Mercer owned a narrow strip of land outside town. Nothing fancy. A tired fence, a slope full of weeds, and a view most people drove past without noticing. But I saw room for a small rental cabin, maybe 2, if the drainage checked out. I had financing lined up, savings set aside, and a plan that made sense. Then I made the mistake of mentioning it at Sunday dinner. Callow smiled like an older brother should. He asked questions. He sounded interested. 2 days later, Mercer called and said he was selling to someone else. Later, I found out Callow had phoned him out of concern and suggested I might be getting in over my head. When I confronted him, he laughed and said, "Come on, Dell. I was just trying to keep you from making an expensive mistake." That was the day I stopped announcing open doors before I had already walked through them. So I opened the green folder alone. Inside were recorded deeds, closing statements, parcel maps, county tax receipts, insurance papers, and the folded survey I had read so many times the creases were soft. Piece by piece, over nearly 2 years, Hollow Creek had become more than the farmhouse everybody mocked. The barn lot, the 2 old cottages, the pond parcel, the storage shed, the backwoods, the private access road running from the county line down toward the creek. All of it sat under Hollow Creek Holdings LLC. Not because I was playing some rich man's game. I was not. I had contractor money, small loans, sweat equity, and a wife who could make a spreadsheet tell the truth better than most people could tell a story. Marin tracked every payment, labeled every receipt, and reminded me more than once that a dream without reserves was just another way to panic later. The last deed had been recorded at the county office on a Tuesday afternoon. Tamsin Greer slid the stamped copy across the counter and said, "That's all of Hollow Creek, Mr. Voss." I did not cheer. I did not call my parents. I sat in my truck with both hands on the wheel and listened to the engine tick as it cooled. That was enough celebration for me. Outside the barn, I heard Marin call my name. I closed the folder and walked into the pale morning light. She was kneeling in the front bed, pressing zinnia roots into soil that was still more mud than garden. The siding on the house was unfinished. The gravel delivery had left ruts along the drive. From the road, the barn probably did look like trouble leaning in the rain, and Marin was planting flowers anyway. I stopped beside her. Why plant flowers before the siding is even done? She patted soil around a lavender start and did not look up. Because this place needs to know we believe in it. That was Marin. She believed in numbers, but she also believed in things before they looked worth believing in. Later that week, a storm bent one of the zinnias nearly flat. She propped it with a little wooden stake. The next morning, before she woke up, I built a low border to keep runoff from washing the bed out. I never told her. She noticed. Hollow Creek was legal proof in a green folder, but that garden was proof of something else. My parents in Callow looked at what was unfinished and called it a joke. Marin looked at the same mud and gave it roots. They thought Hollow Creek was a joke because all they could see was old siding, wet ground, and a barn leaning in the rain. A week later, my parents walked into Marin's kitchen and made the mistake of saying out loud what they had only hinted at before. My mother did not knock when she came to inspect the house she had already decided to hate. It was late afternoon, about a week after the failed dinner. I was in the back hallway measuring trim, pencil tucked behind my ear, trying to make one stubborn corner sit square. Marin was in the pantry doorway painting shelves. One sleeve was pushed higher than the other, and a white streak of primer marked the inside of her wrist. The kitchen smelled like coffee, clean wood, and fresh paint. It felt like work. It felt like hours. Then tires rolled over the gravel. I knew my father's car before I saw it. My body reacted the way it always had, shoulders tightening, breath getting smaller, as if an unannounced visit from my parents was not a visit at all. It was a test. Verna stepped out first. She paused near a muddy patch by the walkway and lifted one foot around it like the ground had personally offended her. Orson shut his door hard, looked at the barn, then the porch, then the house, not at me, at the structure. Like he was estimating how much disappointment could fit under one roof. I set the trim piece down and walked toward the front. Before I reached the door, my mother opened the screen and came in. "We were nearby," she said, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve, "and thought we should see what you two are really living in." "You could have called," I said. She smiled, the kind she used at church when someone brought a dry casserole. A mother shouldn't need an appointment to check on her son. Orson followed her in, wiped his boots once on the mat, and still tracked grit across the floor I had sealed with my own hands. I saw the marks immediately. So did Marin. She did not say a word. My mother stepped into the kitchen and looked around. Open paint can. Cabinet doors sanded and leaning against the wall. Drop cloth folded near the pantry. Marin standing there with a brush in her hand. Then Verna reached into her purse. At first, I thought she was looking for tissues. She pulled out a small lavender air freshener, aimed it toward the center of the kitchen, and sprayed twice. The chemical scent cut through the room. "This might help a little," she said. Then she set the can on the counter, as if she had brought a hostess gift. "You can keep it. I brought an extra." Marin lowered the brush slowly. The metal handle touched the edge of the sink with a soft tap. That sound stayed with me. My father walked past the island and tapped his knuckles against the wall. "Looks worse in person," he said. He glanced through the back window toward the barn. "Did you pay somebody for this place, or did they pay you to take it off their hands?" There was a part of me that wanted to walk to the barn, pull out the green folder, and lay every recorded deed across the table. I wanted to watch their faces change when they saw the maps, the parcels, the road, the creek. But that would have been begging them to respect something they had come here determined to despise. So I kept still. My mother turned to Marin. "Are you really comfortable living like this?" Marin's answer was quiet. "We're comfortable with work." Verna looked at her paint-stained sleeve. "Some women are comfortable with less, I suppose." That did it. Not all at once. Not in a loud way. Something inside me simply stopped negotiating. Orson laughed under his breath and looked from Marin's wrist to my work boots. "You two really are trash if you think this is success." I looked at Marin before I looked at him. Her face did not fall apart. That almost hurt more. She had learned, somewhere before me, how to stand still when people tried to make her feel small. And in that moment, I understood something I should have understood sooner. My silence was not keeping peace. It was asking my wife to pay for it. I stepped between them. Not enough to make a scene, just enough to change the room. "You should leave," I said. Orson stared at me like he had misheard. "Don't start acting like a homeowner just because you bought a dump." My mother's mouth tightened. "Dylan, don't be sensitive. Families speak honestly to each other." "No," I said. "Honesty is not the same thing as disrespect. You should leave." For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then Orson gave a short, bitter laugh. "You've changed." Verna looked past me at Marin. "Someday you'll understand we were trying to keep you from embarrassing yourself." I opened the door and waited. I did not slam it behind them. I did not raise my voice. I watched them walk to the car, my father muttering, my mother holding her purse close like the house might stain it. When the car finally backed down the drive, the lavender smell was still hanging in the kitchen. Marin reached over and opened the window. "I'm sorry," I said. She shook her head. "You didn't say it. I let them get far enough to say it." She looked at the counter, at that cheap little can my mother had left behind. "Next time, they don't come in unless they can respect the house." I knew what she meant. Respect the house. Respect us. There are insults you swallow because they are aimed at you. But when they aim at the person who stood beside you when nobody else did, something changes. I picked up the lavender spray, read the label once, and dropped it into the trash. Outside, the real lavender Marin had planted bent in the wind, still rooted, still alive. That was the first day I understood that keeping peace with my parents might cost me the peace of my own home. By the time they came back needing help, they had already found a softer word for cruelty. My mother did not apologize when she asked for a place to stay. She called it a misunderstanding. Nearly 2 months had passed since the lavender spray landed in our trash can. Hollow Creek had kept moving without my parents' approval. I replaced the back steps. Marin finished the pantry shelves. The zinnias out front had taken hold. Stubborn little things. Even after 2 hard rains and 1 cold snap that made the garden look tired for a week. I was in the barn workshop when my phone buzzed. The air smelled like pine shavings and rain. I had been sorting old lumber, deciding what could be saved for the cottage floors and what needed to be hauled off. My phone sat on the workbench beside a dull chisel and a half-empty mug of coffee. Verna Voss. That old reflex moved through me before I could stop it. Pick up, be useful, fix whatever is broken. Do not make a scene. I did not open the message right away. By then, I had heard pieces of what was happening. Aunt Iva had called Marin just to check in, which meant she wanted to see what we knew. Callow had talked my parents into using the equity in their ranch house for a condo flip near Asheville. He called it bridge financing. He said things like short-term leverage and guaranteed buyer interest. The kind of phrases that sound smart at a dinner table if nobody asks the second question. My father trusted him because Callow sounded successful. My mother trusted him because believing in Callow had become part of who she was. Then the buyer backed out. Carrying costs climbed. The interest rate adjusted. The house my parents had almost paid off was suddenly wearing a notice of default under a church magnet on the refrigerator. Callow, of course, had started stepping away from the mess. "I never forced them to sign anything," he told Iva, and somehow that became his defense. Saren did not want my parents moving into their subdivision home either. "The HOA was strict," Callow said. "The kids did not need the stress." Their guest room was not set up for long-term family complications. That was the golden child's house. Clean, polished, closed. I opened my mother's text. "Whatever was said about your house was a misunderstanding, and your father and I may need somewhere to stay for a few weeks." I read the word misunderstanding again. Then again. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to type, "You called my wife trash." I wanted to ask which part had confused her. The lavender spray? The pigsty comment? The way she looked at Marin like my wife was the reason I had stopped bowing my head. I typed nothing. Before I could decide what to say, a voicemail came in from my father. His voice was tight, but not humble. "Dylan, don't make this difficult. Family helps family. Your mother is upset enough without you dragging old hurt feelings into this." Old hurt feelings. That was another phrase people used when they wanted the injured person to hurry up and become convenient again. A minute later, Callow texted, "Don't punish them over a joke. You've got space. Don't make this about Marin." I stared at that last sentence for a long while. Do not make this about Marin. But that was exactly who it was about. Marin had stood in her own kitchen while my mother sprayed shame into the air and my father called us trash. Callow wanted me to erase that because my parents needed a bed. I sat down on an overturned bucket. The hard part was that I could picture them scared. My mother trying to make a grocery list while pretending she was not counting bills. My father standing in that ranch house, too proud to say he had trusted the wrong son. They were getting older. Fear does not make people kinder, but it does make them look smaller. And I hated that it still worked on me. I could feel the old training waking up, the part that believed love meant making room no matter what it cost. Then Marin came into the barn with 2 mugs of fresh coffee. She stopped before she reached me. "What happened?" I handed her the phone. She read each message without rushing. She did not call my parents' names. She did not say, "Absolutely not." She only looked up after Callow's text and asked, "Are they asking you, or are they using you?" I looked toward the open barn door, where the farmhouse sat beyond the wet yard. "I don't know." "Yes, you do," she said, not cruelly. "If they're asking, they'll hear no. If they're using you, they'll punish you for it." That was the sentence that settled everything. I opened a new message to my mother and wrote carefully. No heat, no paragraph she could twist into drama. "I'll look into options tomorrow, but moving into Hollow Creek is not on the table, not after what was said to Marin." I added that I would send motel information, county housing contacts, and legal aid resources for the HELOC problem. Then I read it twice and sent it. My mother replied within a minute. "Thank you. I knew you'd help us." Nothing about Marin, nothing about what was said, nothing close to sorry. I stared at the missing apology longer than I stared at the words she had actually typed. That evening, Marin and I sat at the kitchen table with the green folder nearby but unopened. The blue plate was back on the shelf. Outside, the lavender moved in the wind, real and quiet. Sometimes family does not ask whether you have room. They ask whether you are still willing to disappear inside your own life. I told myself that offering options was still helping, but my parents heard only the part that sounded like a door. 2 nights later, they came to that door with a moving truck, as if my silence had already given them permission. The gate camera lit up at 7:42 p.m. Marin and I were at the kitchen table, sorting invoices from the cottage repairs. Rain ticked against the windows, steady and cold. The porch light made a yellow line across the wet boards outside, and for once, the house felt sealed off from the rest of the world. Then my phone buzzed, motion detected at front gate. I opened the feed. At first, the rain blurred everything into streaks of white and orange. Then the picture sharpened. My father's SUV sat outside the gate with its headlights on. Behind it was a small U-Haul trailer, hazard lights blinking like a warning. I did not move. Marin came around the table and stood beside me. Through the open back of the trailer, I could see boxes under plastic sheeting. One said Mom's Sewing Room, another said Dad Records, A third said guest bedding. Then I saw one near the edge, written in my mother's neat black marker, back bedroom. They had not come to ask. They had assigned themselves a room. For one foolish second, shame got to me before anger did. Maybe I had not been clear enough. Maybe my message had sounded too soft. Then I saw my own words in my mind. Moving into Hollow Creek is not on the table. I had been clear. They had simply decided clarity did not apply to them. The intercom rang. My father's face filled the screen, rain flattening his hair, jaw set like he was already tired of my behavior. "Open the gate, Dylan. Your mother's exhausted, and the driver is charging by the hour." Behind him, Verna stood wrapped in a cardigan, smaller than usual in the rain. That hurt me more than I wanted it to. She looked cold. She looked scared. She also looked like a woman who had packed boxes for my house without ever saying she was sorry. My thumb hovered over the gate button. That was the hardest part to admit. Not that they came, not that they assumed, but that some trained part of me still reached to fix it. I remembered my mother sewing a patch onto my jacket when I was 9. My father showing me how to hold a hammer without smashing my thumb. Being little and believing if I could just be helpful enough, I would be loved right. The youngest son in me reached for the button before the man I had become could stop him. Then I looked at Marin. She was not crying. She was not standing there with crossed arms, ready to become the villain my mother already wanted her to be. She was wearing an old work shirt, and I could still see a faint white paint stain near the sleeve from the day my parents insulted her in our kitchen. She asked one question. Did they apologize? I did not answer. We both knew. I pressed the talk button, not the open button. "You were not invited to move in." My father leaned closer to the camera. "You said you would help." I said I would look into options. I also said moving into Hollow Creek was not on the table. Verna stepped beside him. Her voice came through softer. "Honey, please, we don't have anywhere else tonight." That almost did it. Not because she was right, but because guilt has a way of wearing familiar clothes. It sounded like my mother. It sounded like Sunday dinners and scraped knees and every commandment about honoring your parents. It sounded like I was failing some test I never agreed to take. Then Orson's patience snapped. "This is ridiculous. You have land. You have rooms. You're really going to let your own parents stand outside because of a few words?" "A few words are why you're outside," I said. His face hardened. "We already told the driver where to unload. Don't embarrass us in front of a stranger." There it was. Not fear, not regret, image. Marin opened the kitchen drawer behind me. I heard paper slide against wood. She took out the envelope she had prepared after my mother's text and set it on the counter. Motel names, county housing numbers, legal aid contacts. Help, but not surrender. My father saw that the gate was still closed and said, "You will regret choosing that woman over your family." The words hit exactly where he aimed them, but they also cleared the fog. "Marin is my family," I said. No shouting, no speech, just the truth. For a while, no one spoke. Rain tapped on the hood of his SUV. Verna looked back at the U-Haul, then at the gate, as if she still could not believe metal and wire were holding where my guilt used to be. This is where it gets hard. It is easy to talk about boundaries when nobody is standing outside your gate in the rain. Would you open it for one night, or keep it closed because they came with a moving truck instead of an apology? I ended the intercom call. I did not open the gate. For nearly 10 minutes, my father paced in the rain. My mother stood by the passenger door, arms wrapped around herself. Finally, Orson climbed back into the SUV, and the U-Haul pulled around with an awkward 3-point turn on the narrow road. They drove toward the highway motel strip. Marin stood close enough that our shoulders touched. A boundary does not feel like victory the first time you hold it. Sometimes, it feels like grief with a lock on it. I did not open the gate that night, and that was when my parents stopped asking for help and started trying to make me pay for saying no. By morning, my mother had turned one locked gate into a family scandal, and somehow Marin had become the villain. The first call came before I had finished my coffee. The rain had stopped, but the porch boards were still dark with water. Marin stood at the counter, moving quietly, pouring cream into her mug. The blue plate sat on the open shelf above the sink. My phone was beside my hand, the gate camera footage from the night before already saved. Aunt Iva's name flashed across the screen. I should have let it ring. Instead, I answered. "Dylan," she said. in that careful voice relatives use when they have already decided you are wrong, but want credit for being gentle. Your mother told me what happened. I looked at Marin. She did not turn around, but her shoulders went still. What did she tell you? That you left them out there in the rain. Your father said they had nowhere to go. Iva sighed. Honey, family should not treat family that way. They came with a U-Haul. A pause. Well, your mother said Marin wouldn't let you open the gate. There it was. My parents had insulted my wife in her own kitchen, arrived with labeled boxes, ignored the boundary I put in writing, and by breakfast, Marin was the problem. I ended the call politely because I still had enough training in me to do that. Then the family group chat started lighting up. Verna wrote, "Your father and I are heartbroken. We only needed a safe place for a few nights." No mention of the pigsty comment. No mention of the air freshener. No mention of trash. No mention of back bedroom written on a moving box before I had ever agreed to anything. Callow joined in a minute later. Dylan has land. He should step up. I almost typed a paragraph. I wanted to explain every piece of it, point by point, like the truth would become more acceptable if I arranged it neatly enough. Marin set a cup of coffee in front of me. Will it pass? She asked. Or will it become the story? I hated that she was right. I put on my jacket and walked down to the mailbox, partly to clear my head, and partly because if I stayed in that kitchen, I might start defending myself to people who had already chosen their version. Harlan Pike was out by the county road in his faded rain jacket, sorting through his mail beside his old truck. He had lived across the bend longer than anyone I knew. He glanced up. Rough night? I gave him a tired look. You saw? Enough. He tucked a bill under his arm. I saw your brother pull over last month, take a picture of this place, and laugh in his truck. I saw you and Marin out here in January with your hands half frozen, trying to keep that porch from sagging. And I saw that trailer last night. He looked toward my gate. That U-Haul wasn't asking for help, Dylan. That was arriving with a decision already made. I stood there a second longer than I meant to. Sometimes, one honest witness can steady a person more than a room full of family. When I got back inside, I opened the folder on my phone labeled Family Comments. I did not write a speech. I sent evidence. Callow's pig sticker story. My mother's misunderstanding text. The screenshot of my message that said moving into Hollow Creek was not on the table. A still from the gate camera, time-stamped, showing the U-Haul in the rain. Then I typed one sentence. I didn't refuse my parents because they needed help. I refused because they arrived with a moving truck after calling my wife trash. The chat went quiet. Typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Aunt Iva finally wrote, I didn't know that part. My mother answered fast. This is exactly what I mean. Marin has taught him to humiliate his own mother. I did not respond. Callow did. This is cruel. Mom and Dad aren't perfect, but they raised us. You have the space. Be a man and step up. Marin was standing beside me now. She looked down at the screen, then walked to the junk drawer where she kept printed receipts, spare keys, and anything she thought might matter later. She came back with her phone open. Verna forwarded this to me by mistake last week, she said. It was a message from Callow to my mother. Mom, I told you, you and Dad can't stay here. The HOA is strict, and Saren doesn't want the kids stressed. Marin did not smile. If he wants to preach, she said, he should use both versions. So, I sent it. Callow's public message first, then his private one. After that, I wrote, Callow, did you want to explain which version is true? His typing bubble appeared, stayed, vanished, returned, then nothing. That silence was the first honest thing he had contributed all day. I saved the whole chat thread, not because I wanted to win the family back. That was not the point anymore. I only wanted the truth to have a record before they buried it under concern and Bible verses and bless your heart phone calls. Later, Harlan's truck rolled slowly past the mailbox. He lifted one hand from the wheel. I lifted mine back. It was not dramatic. It was just enough. By sunset, my parents had lost control of the story, so my father came back for the only thing he still thought he could control, me. He returned to the gate with a printed screenshot in his hand, thinking one cropped sentence could erase everything that came before it. My father held up the paper like a verdict before he ever looked at the deed. He and my mother came back near dusk. The rain had thinned into a mist, but the gravel road still shone under their headlights. The U-Haul was there again, parked behind my father's SUV like a bad decision that had grown wheels. I stood in the farmhouse, watching the gate camera feed. Marin was near the kitchen window. She did not stand in front of me. She did not tell me what to say. She was close enough for me to feel that I was not alone, and that was enough. The intercom rang. I answered but did not open the gate. Orson held a printed screenshot up to the camera. Rain had spotted the paper, but I could still read the single line he wanted me to see. "I'll look into options tomorrow. You told your mother you'd help," he said. "You led us on, and now you're trying to act innocent." Verna stepped closer, wrapped in the same cardigan from the night before. I never thought I'd see the day my own son would make me beg. For a second, I was 12 years old again, standing beside the dining table while my father waited for me to explain why I had disappointed him. My mouth almost opened with too many words. That was the old trap. Marin walked to the porch rail and held out my phone. The full message thread was already open. She said, softly, "Show all of it." Not angry, not dramatic, just done with crop truth. I took the phone and sent the full exchange to the family group chat. The line my father printed, the next line he left out. The part where I said moving into Hollow Creek was not on the table. The part where I offered motel names, county housing contacts, and legal aid for the HELOC problem. Then I sent the time-stamped gate camera image of the U-Haul. I pressed the intercom again. You don't get to crop a conversation and call it truth. My father's jaw worked, but no words came right away. Then Callow's name popped up in the group chat. "Dylan, stop humiliating everyone. You're enjoying this." I did not answer him with anger. I sent his two messages side by side. The public one, "You have the space. Be a man and step up." The private one, "Mom, I told you, you and Dad can't stay here. The HOA is strict, and Seren doesn't want the kids stressed." Then I typed, "Callow, did you want to explain which version is true?" His typing bubble appeared, then vanished. My father looked away from the paper in his hand and pointed toward the farmhouse. "Stop acting like you own everything," he said. "It's one ugly house. You got lucky on a dump, and now you think you're better than us." That was when I picked up the green folder. I walked down the wet path toward the gate. Marin stayed on the porch, beneath the yellow light. The zinnias beside her were bent from the rain, but still standing. I did not open the gate. I opened the small metal mailbox mounted beside it and placed copies inside: the recorded deed summary, the LLC paperwork, the survey map with the county seal. My father pulled them out like he could intimidate paper by gripping it hard enough. The rain dotted the survey as he unfolded it. Red boundary lines spread across the page. They did not stop at the farmhouse. They wrapped around the barn, the cottages, the pond, the storage shed, the backwoods, and the private access road running from the county road all the way down to the creek. Verna leaned in. Her voice changed. "Even the road?" I looked at her through the bars of the gate, from the mailbox to the creek. The silence after that was different from every silence before it. This one had weight. This one had county stamps behind it. My father stared at the map, then back at me. "So you own the road," he said. "Congratulations. That doesn't change what kind of son you're being." Verna pressed her fingers to her mouth. "We didn't mean it like that. You know how families talk." I looked past them, toward the farmhouse window. I could see the blue plate on the open shelf, the one I had set for my mother the night she refused to come. I remembered the empty table. I remembered the covered roast. I remembered Marin standing in her own kitchen while my mother sprayed fake lavender into the air. I was not closing that gate because I never loved them. I was closing it because I had. "You called this place a pigsty when it was mine," I said. "So don't call it home now that you need it." Nobody moved. The rain on the U-Haul roof became the loudest sound on Hollow Creek. My mother opened her mouth, but nothing came out. My father looked down at the survey as if the ground had betrayed him. Was that cruelty, or was that finally a boundary? I still do not know what every person would have done at that gate. I only know what I could not do anymore. I took the envelope Marin had prepared and slid it through the bars. These are options. But this gate stays closed. Inside were 3 motel names with vacancy notes. The county housing office number, legal aid contacts, and a senior assistance line. Help, not surrender. They stood there with the cropped screenshot, the survey map, and the envelope, but not a key. I turned and walked back toward the porch. Marin met me halfway and placed her hand between my shoulders, steady and warm. Behind her, real lavender moved in the mist. I had not stopped being their son. I had only stopped being the door they could open whenever they needed somewhere to put their consequences. Months later, the first light in the Zinnia cottage proved something I no longer needed my parents to admit. The first guest at the Zinnia cottage arrived on a Thursday afternoon with tired eyes, hospital scrubs, and no idea what that little house had survived. Her name was Ruth. She was a traveling nurse working 12-hour shifts in Asheville, and when she stepped out of her dusty compact car, she stood for a moment with one hand on the roof, just looking at the cottage porch light. The siding was freshly painted. The old steps no longer dipped in the middle. The gravel path had settled firm underfoot, and Marin's zinnias lined both sides like they had been waiting for company. Nobody seeing it that day would have known what my parents had called this place. Maybe that was the point. After the gate, Orson and Verna did not move into Hollow Creek. They stayed at a motel near the highway for 2 weeks, then found a small senior apartment with help from the county housing office and one of the legal aid contacts in Marin's envelope. I did not celebrate that. I did not want my parents humiliated or homeless. I wanted the pattern to stop. Callow's image changed too, not in some grand public downfall. Life is not usually that tidy. He still wore pressed shirts. He still talked like he was hosting a seminar. But after the HELOC mess and the 2-version text, nobody in the family said, "Callow understands real estate," with the same confidence. Not out loud, anyway. Aunt Iva stopped forwarding my mother's guilt messages. Every now and then, she sent something short, careful, almost shy. "Hope you and Marin are doing all right." That was not an apology, but it was a shift. My mother mailed one card in the spring, cream envelope, her handwriting. Inside, it said, "We hope you are well." No mention of pigsty. No mention of Marin. No mention of that night at the gate. I read it once and put it in a drawer. I did not throw it away, but I did not put it on the refrigerator either. Forgiveness, I learned, is not the same as access. The first cottage took longer than I expected. Old places always do. A wall that looks straight until you hang a door. A pipe that behaves until the first cold morning. A floorboard that refuses to lie flat, no matter how gently you ask. But Marin and I kept at it. She painted the sign herself, the Zinnia cottage. The letters were not perfect. One leaned a little. The last E sat higher than the rest. I loved it more because of that. Honest things usually carry a handprint somewhere. Inside, we kept it simple. White curtains, refinished pine floors, a small table by the window, a quilt folded over the chair, a view through the trees toward the creek. Nothing fancy, nothing pretending to be more than it was. Before Ruth arrived, Marin carried in a small loaf of bread wrapped in a clean towel. On my mother's blue plate, I nearly stopped her. For 1 second, that plate was back by the window on the night my parents refused to come. Empty, waiting. Foolish in that quiet way hope can be foolish. Marin must have felt me looking. "Is this okay?" I looked at the chipped rim, then at the cottage, then at the woman who had stood beside me every time my family tried to make our life look small. "Yeah," I said, "it's okay." I did not want that plate to stay a monument to who never came. It was made to hold something warm. Marin set it on the little table and added a jar of lavender she had cut from the row outside. Real lavender. Soft, green, earthy. Nothing like the sharp chemical spray my mother had used in our kitchen. That insult had turned into a welcome. Ruth stepped inside and ran her fingers along the back of the chair. "This place feels peaceful," she said. From the porch, I looked at Marin. She smiled, not like she had won an argument, but like she had kept a promise. Later that afternoon, Harlan Pike pulled up in his old truck. He stood near the cottage steps, hands in his jacket pockets, studying the flowers, the fresh paint, the porch rail I had rebuilt twice because the first time still bothered me. He looked over at me and said, "Not bad for a pigsty." I laughed. Not bitterly, not loudly, just enough. That word had lost its teeth. I looked down the gravel road toward the gate. It was closed, same as before. But it no longer looked like a battlefield. It was just a gate. Something built to show where one space ended and another began. I thought about my parents. I did not hate them. I also did not need them to approve of Hollow Creek for it to be real. I did not need Callow to admit what he had done. I did not need my mother to write the right words. I did not need my father to say he was proud. I had Marin. I had work. I had this land, this garden, this quiet place that had taken every insult and kept becoming itself anyway. If you have ever had to close a door someone thought they were entitled to walk through, I hope you know this. A boundary is not hatred. Sometimes, it is the first honest foundation you ever build. The blue plate was no longer waiting for my mother. The flowers were no longer trying to prove the yard was worth saving. And Hollow Creek was finally home because we had stopped asking the wrong people to bless it.